Alrighty.
Hey!
Hello.
Hello. This is Tyler Collins, and
This is Deshaun Sanchez.
so we are on our way to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, because Deshaun lost her keys.
Yep, I left him at a U-Haul, so I left my keys one state over.
So now we're on our way to get them, and since we have about an hour and a half or so to kill, I thought it'd be cool to get a conversation going. So why not begin somewhere, someplace, somehow?
Alright, what is our conversation of topic today?
Today we're talking about why men are missing in church culture. Just in general, it seems to be a problem and a trend that a lot of people have taken notice of in the last 5 or so years. And there's been lots of books on it, lots of blogs, and thought it'd be something, being young college students ourselves, that we could get a pretty good perspective on. But first, Shannon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
As far as what specifically?
So, you're a student in college, correct?
Yes, I am a senior at North Central University, studying intercultural studies / international development.
Awesome. What do you hope to do after college?
We're talking to God about that. I would like to open up a coffee shop / church plant, probably here in the U.S., and then go overseas for a little bit and source some of that coffee and kind of do development with that. So doing the nonprofit stationed here, and then going overseas to go and work with communities, and so going back and forth in that.
Awesome. So kind of the partnering between the world missions and local missions.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. So how long have you been a part of the church?
Wow, I always made a joke that I was born in a baptismal tank because I've been in church for a very long time. But it's kind of the truth. Probably since around 3 or 4 have been in the church in some sense or another.
So then you have a pretty wide, or at least in terms of time, you have a pretty long experience in the church then.
Yes.
So do you think that the population, as far as like men being involved in volunteering and just even in attendance, do you think that's a problem for the church today?
I think it depends on maybe age range. I think definitely you'll see a lot of older males as far as what I can think of. I grew up in a smaller church where a lot of the key role models were those older men. And you can kind of see that number dwindling as I got older and involved in youth group, and then I think most young adults groups, it's a hit or miss. But definitely in the younger generation, as I think we're both probably considered millennials, you don't see a lot of millennial males in the church now.
And what sort of effect do you think that's having on the church right now?
I don't know. I really couldn't tell you. I think coming from a youth perspective, because I did a lot of interning with a bigger church down in Texas, it's a lot harder for young males who are going to youth group or going to these things. They don't really have these people in their lives that kind of walk them through what it is to grow into adulthood, and kind of this, our generation more than any other generation has been deemed the fatherless generation, so not a lot of dads being in the home, but at the same time you've seen that trickle now into the church. There is also now not a lot of spiritual fathers, and so I would say this probably the same thing that you could say in the emotional or mental development of young adolescent males who are without fathers could be also the same thing they're experiencing spiritually because of not having a wide selection of male role models.
Yeah. Do you think this is something that um, that's going to adjust itself, or do you think it's just kind of a phase right now for the church to be in, kind of this fatherlessness that they're experiencing?
I think if it's not addressed within the church in and of itself, I think it will continue just like fatherlessness is in America. I mean, if there's not really a push as individuals to, if, for instance, a young man and his girlfriend get pregnant, I think it's up to him I mean, you have micro and you have macro, of does he decide to stay and step up to that plate or does he leave? I think the same is how we're going to change it, if it is going to change, happens on these micro levels of, okay, the men that we do have in our doors, how are we using them? How are we utilizing? How are we growing them? And so when you have that elder in the church, when you have that young adult who is in youth group and wanting to be a leader, when you have these men, allowing them to lead and allowing them to grow in that capacity. In reality, that's the only way that's going to change.
So then with the lack of leadership, I definitely that's something I find myself agreeing, because if you have no example, nothing to look to, you kind of have no idea where to go, and I think it's kind of the biggest picture of fatherlessness is they don't know how to be fathers. Passive fathers beget passive fathers, or absent fathers. So I definitely agree. It's like, man, we have to find ways to utilize the men who are coming to our church.
Yeah, I think, and we kind of talked about this in our own separate conversation, but the feminization of church and church culture, which isn't bad, but you have Bob and his wife go to church every single Sunday because maybe his wife wants him to. Bob enjoys it. Bob grew up in a family that, taught him that going to church was good. He feels it makes him a better person, a better father, a better husband, a better person at his work. But besides that, that is Bob's only reason to go. And I think a lot of the reasons we encourage people to go is more like the being involved. For instance, if you go to any church, the number one place that you're going to be plugged to probably instantly without having to do much background check or knowledge of how ministries run is hospitality. I know a lot of great men who are great hosts, but it's probably not their number one pick. Versus maybe a parking lot attendant or maybe an usher. But outside of an usher, outside of a parking lot attendant, I think the issue is, where are the places that we are plugging these awesome, amazing men who are wanting to live out for God, wanting to find their place in the body of Christ? And I don't think we have that yet.
Yeah, it's definitely something, just to agree with you once again, is if you're a guy, where do you serve in the church? Because if you don't play, if you don't sing guitar, that made no sense. But if you're not playing an instrument or singing, or if you're not the pastor, there seems to be very split field as far as what's actually places you can serve. Basically, you see men as ushers, and you see men as parking lot attendants, or you see them in higher up leadership. So how do we take some of the more, I guess, gender specific or gender preferred positions, and how do we open some of them up so that men have more places to serve than at the front door or at the offering basket.
I need to preface that with I think terminology in this type of conversation is really good. Not without going on a tangent, I think it's needing to be clear that it is gender preferred. Let me rephrase this by saying that this is not to say that women can't or won't gravitate towards being a parking lot attendant, or you will have those men who occasionally or generally love working hospitality, but it is outside of these where do men fit.
Yeah, I think terminology is really important, and this is meant to create more dialogue and kind of say, hey, there's a problem, but how are we going to work on this? And with that, we need to all be on the same page as far as what terms we're using. What are ways we can, make church a place that men can serve, men can be involved?
I think it's getting the dialogue open as far as, besides men's breakfasts and the occasional maybe men's camping trip, are we as the church really asking men what they want to be involved in? I think it goes back to that. I think women naturally are very vocal or gravitate to something or are really passionate and feel, I want to start a mom's day out. I want to start a VBS. Or this should be done. And this is also is a generalization. I don't think men do that as much as far as this is something I see that can be done or I want to be involved in. I think it's up to we as church leaders to go and ask these questions of people of the congregation, the people that are involved, and being open to that. And so I think at this point it would be, I can't answer, so I would ask you, as the male in this car, in this booth, in what ways were you involved in with church, and what ways were some of your peers involved in with church? And then how would you, if your pastor came up to you and asked how would you like to be involved, what would that look like for you?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult because, I know being in leadership, there's that you want people to serve, but you also don't want to be forcing people who don't want to serve to feel guilty. And so opening that dialogue is very, very important. It's also got to be done like surgery, because most people are busy, and not to say that no one is, but that men, when they're working 40, sometimes even upwards into the 60 hours a week, finding those little ways that they can enrich church culture and church life by being involved is a dialogue that has to be had. And so I think the way that has to look is very much just, as a pastor, taking the men who are in your church and, as you're talking to them after service, be like, hey, if there's something you could do better, if we hear something we could do better, what can we do better? And then, listen to the ideas, and then sometimes being like, hey, you had this idea, do you want to do something with it? And opening that opportunity, not just to fill a role, but open an opportunity to kind of own something that that's on their heart and it's on their mind, and then that way they feel ownership of the church. I think that really is what it looks like when you start getting the men involved in your church, is that they're no longer saying, oh, I'm just filling a role, what they begin seeing, and they begin working on the different things that need to be worked on.
Yep. I think it's that. I think it's, which, I mean, I know the topic is men and the church, but I think that can be done with anyone, really. I mean, I think that is really good, just leadership in general, as far as how, are we taking the people that we have and letting them, I think, well, going back to, and this is a side tangent, going back to the church, is the church just a place for people to come and sit and then go about their lives, or are we really equipping, are we really allowing, goes back to discipleship, are you really allowing these people to follow the passions that God has put on their heart, and at the same time, are we providing an outlet for that? I would very much believe that the woman who is super involved with VBS, that's she's living out her calling and doing that. I think the woman who is organizing the missions trip for the youth is very involved in that. And so I think it's that, is how are we tapping into the passions and the dreams that these men have outside of work or whatever it is that's in their life, and really allowing them to flourish in that.
Yeah, and going one step further is the passions that are on a man's heart and the way that they're carried out are going to look different, because there's different needs that they're made to fill in a church. Otherwise, we'd all be one gender and we'd all be just filling out everything, or it'd all be based off of just personality and whatnot. I think that sometimes, when there's a need, it will look different. Kind of like when there's a need in the church for women to get together and grow together and have that connection. Women's Bible study, where they get together and they have breakfast and they read a book and they talk about it. That's probably a very appropriate response. But for men, when they have the need to connect, it may look a lot more like getting a softball team together or something. And I think we have to allow those differences if we're going to allow them to be involved. Otherwise, we're just saying, hey, we want you to be involved, but we want you to leave your mess at the door. We want you to leave your differences at the door. And I think that's a problem that we see in some churches, is when they think like a men's Bible study, they think that this is what a Bible study should look like. Maybe part of letting men be involved is letting them really explore how they want things done in their context and in their calling.
I definitely agree with you, but this is the part where we will disagree, as you will see. Because I've heard the flip side. I've heard a lot of young men who've gone through different issues in their life talk about, or just in general, where you have, alright, all of the men, we're gonna go hunting this Sunday. Well, what if you have a man who doesn't like hunting or fishing or camping or some of these very, for lack of a better term, very stereotypical male things? Maybe you do have that odd man who, I would love to sit and have coffee and talk intellectually about this passage. So not discrediting the fact that for me, I see more personality. I understand, though, that there are ways in which men connect better, as far as, yes, men connect better doing some type of physical action, maybe a sport, maybe a game, maybe something, but not to disvalue the same type of communication, of the one-on-one, of the let's sit down, those deep philosophical type of learning, rather than I'm gonna go fishing with my buddy and that's how we connected to each other and God and built community, because that's what men do. But like I said, it goes back to, I think, the last part you said, in that I think men should be allowed to have say in, we want to start a men's Bible study, but what does that look like? Because you might have Bob who loves to go out and be really outdoorsy, but maybe you have Chad who likes to go out to open mic nights and loves sitting and drinking coffee till 5 in the morning.
Yeah, and something is like, want to be very, very like careful, very particular is, yeah, there's going to be men who to different levels are comfortable with what, our culture has deemed manly activities like sports and hunting and whatnot. And I'm not at all saying, oh, we should, every church should have a camping trip and a hunting trip and play softball during the summer. And what I'm saying is the men in your church, when they come up with their solutions, it's not going to be the same. And because what happens is the way that men even put emphasis on that connection and that talking is, man, I really enjoyed your company. I'm glad we talked about so much. Kind of more of a quantity as well as a quality of the conversation. And so I think I see that as well, even in the men that I know who aren't in as much to the physical activity. So I do want to be very careful and just I realize that, but I mean, in the church, we just have to be okay with, hey, this is going to look different than what we've done before, because it's not going to be the same as everything we've done in the past.
So since we are talking about males in the church, I think I will always just come back and defer to you. So what ways do you feel going through different churches in the area, or your own personal experience or others' personal experience, that you can look at now as a young male in the church saying, these are where my personal needs aren't being met as an individual? So maybe others are thinking the same thing. Maybe it's a frustration other people are experiencing in this.
Yeah, I think kind of my experience in many churches has been the women do their thing and the men do their thing over here. And I think as much as we're talking about how are we getting men involved in church, and we're talking about all these new things, I think it's probably one of the most damaging behaviors that in thought patterns we have in the churches is this extreme separation of men and women. And I think something that Corner Church in Minneapolis, the church I currently attend, and does really well, is that there really isn't a men and women's group per se. There's a Saturday morning Bible study, and then there's the independence group and the married group, and we're all together. But there are activities that you do relate better to, and the way that we relate to one another as the church is very different. I think that that idea of men attracting men, because you have all sorts of people in church who, ranging from the hipsters who drink coffee and would rather sit around and talk about computers and stats, than you have other guys who are running 5Ks regularly and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's something is like men attract men, and what you really find is that if you get into a church community that's doing well, it's because it's letting men do that. It's letting men shine. It's not trying to repress them or set them over in a separate box, but it's saying, hey, you're a part of this church. Like, and then those men draw men who are like them. So I think that's kind of how healthy church life is kind of described in at least my experiences.
So ideally, I mean, from your own, what you said, it's not really, let's make more men's Bible studies. And because like you said, with Corner, there isn't really that kind of very gender specific, probably more so life specific. Like we said, you have the marrieds group, so married guys go and talk about married guy things. You have the independents, where we're all just figuring out life and just as a general community. So it's not really gender specified, but allowing, if a man is involved in these sorts of activities, allowing them to be heavily involved.
Yeah, I mean, no one wants to be a part of something that they're just there. They want to feel some sort of ownership, like they're contributing. Especially as a man, that's something that's like, if you're not getting something done, if you're not contributing, it's like, what's the point? And so I think that our church, which is very non-traditional, does very well is the men who are involved and the men who do come, they own in some ways the conversation, the activities that are going on. And I know our pastor Scott is very, very much, if someone wants to do something, he's very much behind them. And so that sort of ownership, just really empowering the men in your church, is something that is attractive to them.
So this okay. So the issue now has then become empowerment. And so in what ways have men not been empowered in the church in the past? Because I feel like, actually, on the flip side, as a woman, I could very well say the same, that you are now seeing more, maybe on a volunteer level, you see more of it being heavily leaning towards more women than men. But I could also argue the same in reverse. I see more men on a platform than I would ever see a woman. And so I think, to play devil's advocate, I think both genders have not been empowered to fully be involved in the ways that they see fit in the church. But going back, how do you feel that men aren't being empowered? Obviously.
Well, and I know this is something that's very hot all around. One of my friends even posted a blog, and it was shared by a professor at North Central University. It's something that the fact that men are the majority of clergy in any denomination is kind of a touchy thing. And it's like, well, is there something wrong with that? And I think, I think you look at is that men in clergy are still that's very, very small percentage of the church. If you were to take all the clergy and add them up and then weigh it against the rest of the congregation, they would still make up a very small percent. It's something that's said is like 5% of the church doing 95% of the work. And that's true, is that the pastors are doing a lot of the work. And I think how they're not empowering men or empowering congregation in general, just kind of taking a little bit of a rabbit trail, is there are opportunities and there are things that the pastors don't have to be in charge of or involved, and they can be handing those things off to other people. Morning announcements and all that can be done by a member of the congregation. And furthermore is how do you see more women in leadership is beyond volunteering, beyond babysitting kids in the nursery on Sunday morning, kind of getting into why women aren't being empowered into leadership roles, is local churches, for the most part, are not teaching and training at that leadership level. Most of that is outsourced to colleges and seminaries and other places. And so I think how you empower your congregation as a whole is allowing them those opportunities that doesn't really have to be done by a staff member. And then beyond that, start providing the training and such that they can begin to see them in leadership roles. The women in your church are capable of speaking, and I think it's something pastors are very careful not to hand the mic over, because they don't want some whack job getting up there and declaring that we all worship a golden calf or something. But you have to begin to let people have those leadership experiences, those experiences where they're speaking on Sunday morning, and that's only going to happen if you step out. And that's just in general. That's for your whole congregation. Yeah.
I think we've delved into it's not. I mean, yes, it is a men in the church issue, but it is how are we as church leaders getting the people involved. And I don't know, it may have been Scott Wooler of Corner who talked about this, but we often see church, and it's not bad. It's not bad to have order. Even the Bible has some type of system laid up as how churches should run and function to some extent. But we do see that literally the pastor is on this pedestal, and the pedestal is his, and then it's the rest of the congregation. Whereas, working with Scott, working with different pastors, it is, yes, I am in this role and God has put me here, but how am I empowering you? How am I giving you the tools to go and do the things God has called you? And I think that it's not how are we empowering men, but how are we empowering people? How are we empowering the person who wants to speak despite gender to allow that opportunity? Are we allowing people to find the giftings that they have and not seeing it with those 4 or 5 men or women, if they are in leadership, those top positions? How are we delegating these things out to, is the pastor more not valuable, but more needed here in the office with this business meeting about funding, or can another person who is gifted in that, who loves doing that, step in? Is this pastor needed to make this hospital visit, or is someone who's worked in a doctor who's worked in pediatrics his whole life, is he more equipped to go and do that kind of follow-up and pastoral care? And I think it is how are we allowing people to move, rather than thinking these church leaders, which they are, God, been anointed by God, but they can't be all things they can't be at all these places at once.
Yeah, and I think we've got to get to this place where the pastor's primary job is looking over a flock and not managing the finances, planning the calendar, doing the business meetings, preaching and teaching, doing all the counseling, all stuff. Pastors are overworked as it is, and the only way we're going to step away from that is if we begin starting to empower our congregations. We've talked a lot about men in the church during this time. How about men outside the church and getting them to come to church? Why do you think it is that men aren't coming to church?
I think that is a huge thing. I think it depends a lot on age. I think the majority of maybe the older population, for instance, going back to my fake family, Bob had a wonderful experience growing up in church, and for the most part has stuck with it, either maybe out of a sense of moral obligation or finds something very enjoyable in his time there. Now, say Bob grew up with Randy, who both grew up in church, whereas Bob had a great experience. Randy just saw nothing but everything short of what Christ would look like, and has deemed the whole church thing very hypocritical, very two-faced, and has nothing to do. I think a lot of the older generation has some type of, I've seen it, I've heard all of it, and I don't want to go back, and you can't force me. A lot of maybe the younger generation of males, one is they're out too busy having fun, and according to them, church is boring. And also, if they do come, it is, I'm trying this out. I think a lot of our age group is very into the new and the novel and the what's next, and so maybe going to church to try, and this would be the term they would probably use, to try out this Christianity thing to see if it works for me, and if it doesn't, they move on. This kind of religion or ideology buffet. And I think those two main factors of either someone who's seen it all and doesn't want to go back, or someone who isn't really ready or understands, isn't really looking to commit to anything, but more explore possibilities for what is quote unquote out there once we die.
I think adding to that is Christianity has kind of given itself this sort of aura that you have to check your brains in at the door when you join, and I think that's really damaging, and something that we're experiencing at a large level, especially here in the United States right now.
Well, yeah, I think, going back to kind of how you said that churches aren't really pushing forward training, I also think you're not really, I mean, in this sense, me more than anything in the world, a lot of times when people hear the word Christian, they don't think intellectual. Those two, for some reason, don't coincide together in a lot of people's minds. And so it is this kind of image of people who are Christians aren't critical thinkers. They take what is told to them at face value. There's not a lot of research into what the Bible says, or what it, all the different translations, and where were things lost and where were things added. There's no type of deep thinking. There's no type of really just processing. And I think there is kind of that stigma of you believe this because your grandma believed it, your mom believed it, your parents believed it, or you were somehow brainwashed. You found the Nikes in the Kool-Aid and you drank a whole big gulp. And I think that's very true. Which outside of this is probably another, besides the men in church, and how do we address a fatherless generation, not just outside of the church, but also within its walls. No spiritual fathers. I think this is the other big issue of how are we training our congregation not to just be good Christians. I think one of the things I love, one of my favorite Sunday mornings was with, and I preface this that maybe not everybody agrees with his theology, was Greg Boyd at his Sunday service, and it was an open forum where people could come in with all the hard questions that people want to know. Does God exist outside of out of time? What does it mean for God to be fully loving and all powerful, and yet you have these natural disasters like Katrina or genocide in Darfur, and just different things like that. And one of the things that he had said towards the end of that was he's like, I know a lot of you, today was a really big push. You're used to coming in with somebody on a guitar and a keyboard, and for you that's worship. He's like, but I believe that what we did today was exact. And this idea of how are we as Christians, how do we wrestle with doubt, how do we wrestle with questions. Greg Boyd also grew up at the church, and he said that as a Christian, I was always told that having these type of things somehow made me bad because I didn't have enough faith. I didn't have enough belief. He's like, but it is these questions that have strengthened my faith more than anything. And he talked about, and we quote this all the time, and it's really interesting. A lot of us don't understand the background. But Christ, when he's talking about, the greatest commandments and how are we supposed to live, he says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul. He's quoting out of Deuteronomy. He adds the word mind, and I think sometimes we as Christians lose out. We understand what loving God with all of our heart is. We understand loving God with all of our soul. God calls you to do something. We understand loving God with, physically by either building a house for someone or going overseas for short-term or long-term missions or doing some type of crazy thing. But I don't think we understand what does it mean to stretch our minds in service to Christ. God gave us a soul. Yes, God gave us a heart. Yes, but God also gave us a beautiful brain that's capable of questioning and solving and really delving into these ideas. And so, yeah, I would say that's probably another reason some men don't go to churches. They're not being challenged intellectually.
Yeah, I think beyond even that challenge is there's a level of competency. Like, it's said that all men want to be competent and challenged. And I think kind of that combination of the two is like, you have to challenge people intellectually, but if you're not even competent, it's like, man, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You don't even want to be a part of it. And so being competent is one of the challenges, I think, that men have had to overcome in the church. And then even those who are outside the church, they come in and they see us, and if we aren't competent, if we don't know what we're talking about, that's just a big turn off.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, maybe part of the reason, I mean, at least for me, is our churches talking about the bigger issues in question. Are these men really here to get a check mark on their church attendance, or is there something really going on in their life that they can say, not let me Google this, or let me go and talk to, and not to say that what I'm about to say, that counselors are bad, or let me go to a counselor, but what is going on? You know, these heart issues, for instance, like I talked about with Greg Boyd. People want to know, if God is all loving and God is all powerful, then why did I just lose my job? Why is my marriage falling apart? Why are my kids reacting this way? And I think it's that, not just here's the Bible verse and I'm going to pray for you. Not right now, because I have a meeting to go to, but maybe sometime later. But really, how are we addressing these harder questions, these deep real life issues that people have, and not sugarcoating it? That's another thing too, is how are we taking real people with real issues and giving them a place to live that out and flesh that out and find some answers, even though we don't have all the answers. At least, like you said, are we competent to meet these needs?
Yeah. You have to be real. Like, beyond knowing what you're saying, you have to be real. You have to tackle those real life issues. And I think because the church has refused to talk at a level that is calm and intellectual on issues like homosexuality, on issues like abortion and stuff. We had those years where we were just ranting, and we just lost all credibility because we couldn't handle it in a good manner. And beyond that is, are we talking in the church about what people are dealing with? And I think a lot of times we're not, because we see these kind of broad stroke issues that are happening in the church, and they're a lot safer to deal with than when you get down to the nitty gritty. I think that's something too, is that church just isn't what they need, because it's just not real enough for them.
I think for me, both of these issues can be fixed and will be fixed in time with that. A demolishing of the pedestal in every sense of that word. I very much know I am called to be a leader, but being a leader doesn't mean doing everything. Being a leader means handing those things off, allowing people to find their passions. But also for me, it means a call to be vulnerable, a call to be open and honest with the people that I am leading. And I think you're right. I think that what happened with Randy is he saw maybe someone who professed to love God and then go and beat their kid or cheat on their wife or embezzle. Every single person that I've talked to who has left the church in some form or fashion wasn't because of God himself, but people, and usually people who were considered leaders. And I think the way that we go about fixing that isn't how do we make these people better, but how do we make these people honest? How do we make Christians honest? The number one thing besides judgmental that you hear associated with the word Christian is hypocritical. And it's a demolishing of that pedestal of not how am I just hoarding all this power, but how am I also as myself getting off the pedestal. And as far as I have a wonderful friend who is the student body president for North Central, and his sermon was talking about Micah and this idea of what it is to walk humbly with your God. And, it's something that we quote, it's something that we say, but I don't think it's something that we necessarily live. And this idea of humility isn't you shrinking into the background as we would like to think, or shying away and not being the first one to speak up, but it is actually the reverse. It is humbly, boldly, unashamedly saying, these are my flaws, and this is where I messed up, and this is how God is great. And he'd finished that sermon with opening up a lot about different issues that he had in his life. He said it there, so I'm fine saying it here, with issues of, which is it's really interesting because we often see this in reverse. We think of men naturally struggling with lust or pornography or sexual identity, and women more struggling with issues of body image or eating disorder. So it was really interesting to see a combination of both in his life of, yes, I am a man and I've struggled with bulimia. And it's, for someone who had ever met him, you think you see this awesome, and he is, this doesn't detract from that, this awesome, amazing man of God who can speak very eloquently, has now just laid every single issue that he's ever dealt with in his life to people. And I think it's not. I think men more so. Yes, they're not experiencing this realness, but I think that is on a human level. How are we as a church demolishing those pedestals in our life of I'm speaking behind this mic, but really in reality I'm no different from the person sitting in front of that first row. And actually maybe there's something that person in the front row is going through that I can relate to as a leader, and just opening that and not being scared to walk humbly with their God.
Yeah. So we talked about what's keeping men out of church. What are ways that we can get men to start coming to church?
I think going back to what we said, how are you utilizing the men that you have? If you have, I think you're an example. If you have men in your congregation who maybe in their college, maybe in their early 20s or late 20s, and you have a youth group, get them plugged into that if they want. Or kids ministry. If you have a guy who's going to school for education, get him plugged in there. One, he's allowed to use his giftings and the things that he loves, but two, kids can see someone who is that shining male figure that they may not have at home. If you have a couple that have been married for 50 years, instead of just inviting the one woman to come and host, allow them both to come and talk about what has worked for them, what hasn't worked for them. Allowing that knowledge, I think it also goes intergenerationally. How are we allowing that those previous generations, those pillars that are in the church, these great men and women of faith, how are we allowing them to pour into our lives? But also, if you are one, is a challenge. If you're a male, how are you pouring that into the next generation? And you don't, I think it's to understand, you don't have to be a pastor to do that. My dad was in the military half of his life and didn't have the best relationship with his father. Both my parents came from pretty abusive homes in some way, shape, or form. And one of the biggest testaments I've seen in his life is people that grew up with us, as they later on grew up and started families of their own, looked and said to my dad, "You, not my own father, but you were the one who taught me what it was to be a dad, what it meant to be a man of God." And I think it's those men that you have in the church now, you want people to say that of them. You want people years from now, whether or not that's their own kid or their own brother or their own cousin or uncle or grandfather, you want that. And I think it's finding those outlets for them of how are they living that? How are they, as they themselves are figuring out what it is to be a man of God, they need people to lead the way. That in and of itself is discipleship. It is someone who is also on this journey towards Christ, who may be just a couple steps ahead of you. And I think it's, if you're on the road, finding those other people who may be a few steps behind you, and how are you leading them?
Yeah, if you're a man and you're going to church, you need to be involved in some way. You need to go to your pastor or whoever it is and say, hey, like, this is what I'm good at. Is there some way this can be used for the church? And you may think that your construction job doesn't qualify you, but I'll tell you, when they need stage props built, you're probably going to be the first guy they're looking to. Or you may think that as a writer, they don't need me, they need people who physically can do things. But those church announcements, they don't get written on their own, and someone who has a bit of creativity would add a lot of life to them. And it's just, if you're a man, you need to be involved. If you're a pastor, you need to kind of call your men into church. You need to let them own it and just really take part in the shaping and the molding of it, along with the rest of your congregation, but especially men, if you're looking to get men involved, because men attract men. And if you are not going to church and you're a man, it's just something that I think there's so many different churches that even if you were hurt in the past, there's another place, there's another church, or maybe it's even just a coffee shop somewhere where you can sit down with Christians and just figure life out. Even if you don't agree, just hearing their perspective will help you, and in the long run. So just wherever you are, like, I guess the general overall message is kind of get involved in some way in churches.
Yeah, and I would just throw it to all church leadership, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, pushing yourself in that, and then really owning that Micah 6:8 of how are we, and I know bringing up corner, but let's redefine. I think if anything, that's my takeaway of this. Let's redefine for the men inside and outside of our churches, but also for the culture around us, redefining what Christians are and what Christianity is and can and be and looks just lived out.